Thank you. Everyone's super awake. The party was good, so you should be awake. It's like 12. So I'm Alex Nichiporchik with TinyBuild, and I'm joined by Evan Liu from NetEase, all the way from China. So before we start and before I give the context, who here makes games? Разработчики игр. Please raise your hands. Okay, so we have game developers here. Who here has ever noticed sales from China? У кого продажи из Китая есть? So we've started noticing this a while ago on Steam when you launch a game and then you add Chinese localization and all of a sudden your sales just magnify in the region. And I really wanted to have a fireside chat with someone who has insight on what is the Chinese market, how does it monetize, how does it differ from the West, and what can game developers, so you guys in the audience, can do to leverage that growing market. So Evan, could you give us a little bit of context about what NetEase is and what you do?
Sure. Just a brief introduction about myself. So I'm Evan. I work in NetEase Games, which is the biggest developer in China and the second publisher in China. So I work in the division of investment and strategic partnership, that kind of stuff. This is also my first time to be here to sort of see how the Eastern Europe game industry grows and feel very, very excited and passionate about it. So back in China, I think we work on a lot of stuff on mobile for sure. You guys know that. We are also sort of growing our muscle and just attention on PC games and console games in general. Because you see, 2 years ago, we have seen the end of this sort of console ban. So yeah, we are growing more interested, also just learning from people overseas from Western countries and Eastern Europe.
Yeah. So NetEase, what kind of games would we recognize that you guys work on? I know you operate a couple of games in China. Could you talk a little bit about that, just so I know that you guys operate my favorite game maybe in the market?
Well, I guess that's not a Chinese game, right? So yeah, we have. So basically, I think 80% of our games are mobile. I know it's nowadays it sounds kind of evil to say mobile and free-to-play kind of stuff, but I think the industry is quite different and the market is quite different in China. So we have about 50 studios in-house, around 8K developers,
8,000.
Yes, 8,000. China is populated, so it's not just because of the company is big, but because of the country is big. So you get to grow a relatively big company. So we have about 8K developers, with 80% of them developing mobile games. Of course, we're also doing some publishing with overseas partners like Blizzard. We have a joint venture with Blizzard starting 2008, and since then we've been publishing and operating premium games like, of course, Overwatch, but also StarCraft, Diablo, that kind of stuff.
Right. So the way it works, from what I understand, is in order to publish in China, someone like Blizzard will go to a company like NetEase. So when you do that, how does a game need to change? What kind of aspects should game developers be aware before they can, release their game in China? Because for context, we've done speedrunners and we had to remove some signs in the game that weren't complicit. But maybe there are some cultural things that you can talk about.
So you're talking about those culture and policy, right?
Well, more about we know that people haven't played console games in China for a while. And since the ban happened, for example, have people been playing mostly on mobile devices, mostly on PC? Is controller now a really big thing? What kind of things you may have noticed that aren't that apparent to us? Because we all look at the games market from the American lens, right? What's popular in the US should be popular everywhere else in the world. But we all know that that's not necessarily the case when it comes to China.
Yeah. So I actually think, because I travel a lot for these years, Actually, so before I even went outside of China, I think Westerns tend to think very differently and live differently as opposed to the lifestyle of Chinese. But I went to a host family in United States for like 2 months, a couple years ago, and then I've been traveling around the world. And I think the truth I find out is that like we're all kind of human beings, so we have the similar appetite on things, and we all think about the same thing. We all appreciate the same kind of style game. I think the difference is pretty much about the history of a country. So I'll tell you, I grew up playing Nintendo FC, but it's pirate version because we don't have that kind of stuff 20 years ago. So we all have this 60 games in one cassette in the pirated Nintendo FC. We're growing up playing that. And I think another time point is around 2002. Korean online games, they exploded. So we all, most of the players in China have been playing the Korean online MMO games since then. And of course, the pirated FC lost popularity. There's another 2 good time points I want to mention about. One is Dota. So it's around 2008. At that time point, so we have this cyber cafe in China, which is super popular. In cyber cafe, so you got these hundreds of different computers lining up together, and you can just pay for $1 for $1 for 3 hours and play just all day with your friends. And all the games in cyber cafe are pirated for sure. So the most popular game is of course Warcraft 3 and Dota as for its mod, and also we got CS, Counter Strike. We got Left 4 Dead, so all those kind of stuff. So 2008 actually saw the first generation of sort of online game getting into popularity. So after that, people's been crazy about Dota and following Dota, League of Legends. Also, after 2 years, the China console market sort of popped up, and there's some sort of Eastern martial art game. Which is it's weird Chinese names. I just skip on that. But basically, it got sales for 2 million sales in 1 year. So that was the first time Chinese players really had the appetite to buy premium games for a fixed price. And after that, Blizzard came in. So in 2000, and of course, Blizzard's been operating World of Warcraft since 2008. But in 2012, Blizzard came in with Diablo. And Diablo was regarded as mission impossible just to bring to China, because you know how hard the China censorship was. And the game itself was bloody and gory. And so we made a lot of efforts to bring it to China. But yes, I think it made an impact because the game sold even it's long after the Asian server came. The game sold about 3 million copies at the price of $20 US or something. Of course, we made a lot of promotion. For example, we made the first 4 chapters for free just to attract the people. But that was the major time point that you really see this premium game market forming up. And then came Steam, with Dota, CS:GO, especially Dota 2 getting popularity. Then you saw Overwatch. So we sold Overwatch 6 million copies in half year with a price point of $40 US. So I think, and then everything you heard of in the news and outlets, it all just came out. You heard this miracle about Human Fall Flat sold 1 million copies in China. Yes, so that's the path we went, where we went from. But I think the players, they've been struggling to find good games in China. And after the console bans, with TinyBuild and other very premium Western developers listing their games on different stores, we really see the Chinese appetite growing more and more similar to the Westerners.
Right. So from what you're telling me, it looks like the timeline, if cyber cafes formed or became popular towards the end of the early 2000s, that means that Because what happened here in Eastern Europe is that I remember around 2001, 2002 is where the internet cafe happened here. You know, like I was in high school.
You have the same stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, you know, we were skipping school playing, you know, Counter-Strike. So with the current situation, if game developers who are here listening to us were to make, you know, like effort towards making their game popular in China, what is the best course of action? Like, what should they watch out for? What should they do?
I think there are two things. One thing is, of course, about the game itself. Another thing would be the relevancy in China. Just to address the first thing, I think you guys are all making great games and have better expertise and knowledge about I am, because I don't make games. Like, I play a lot of games, but I myself is not a game designer. Even though I always want to be. I think the key is about the game itself. For example, I think there are three things when it comes to me. The first thing is about the hook, right? I think hook is especially important in China because I'll give you guys one example. So, like Human Fall Flat is a physical simulated like multiplayer brawler. It's not like game-based, but it still has the like the hook of, you know, you can just mess around with your friends and play online. So that game sold like 1 million copies in China. But that is not the most important part because hook can come from a lot of aspects, right? You get this very funny metagame as physical simulation. It can come from, so we had another game in China called Love and Producer. It's a weird game. Basically, you are playing a girl dating like 5 like super handsome guy in the universe.
At once?
Yes, of course.
Okay, I want to play that.
So it's basically a narrative. Like there's no gameplay at all. There's basically just you're just reading those texts, and right, there are different occasions. You know, scenarios you are running into just based on your choices. I think it's like a degraded version of Telltale games. That game went super popular because so it got like 2 million DAU with 300 million RMB like revenue per month. And I think, sorry.
Wait, so how did that monetize?
Simple. So they just, if you want to sort of having this love interest with another handsome guy, you just buy chapter to unlock it. And that's, yeah.
Huh, okay, so basically a love simulator game like those old Flash games became like one of the biggest games.
Yes, I'm not trying to sort of twisting your arm to sort of looking at those hook and trying to replicate that kind of experience, but I really think hook can come from a lot of aspects. For example, I think Love and Producer benefit, of course, the production value is pretty high, just from a female's perspective. But I really think those kind of game has captured the opportunity of the growth of female players in China. So we have about, as just for premium players, I actually ran a survey last year. So I ran a survey about, I gave out like 3,000 samples covering all age groups, covering both genders, and of course covering tier 1 to tier 4 cities in China. I'm not covering any rural areas because it's just difficult to cover. But just based on the result I got, we have about like 50 million premium players. And by premium players, I mean people have played at least one premium games in its lifetime. So yeah, I think there are different hooks, comes from different aspects. It may come from like market growth. It might come from, it's just something interesting you want to check out. And I think on top of it, the production value has to be high. Once the player enters the game, it has to be satisfying, and the game has to be sort of entire for players to play and call their friends to play together. And Chinese players so into those sort of online experience, like of playing with friends, is always the extra points. So yeah.
It's funny because you mentioned Human Fall Flat. I remember specifically that game. They added online multiplayer close to Christmas of I think last year. and then went onto the Steam sale, and all of a sudden you see like thousands of reviews from Chinese players raising it upwards.
Yeah.
So you're saying that online multiplayer could be a deciding point if a game becomes popular?
Yes, I think because there's also a historical reason for that. Just like I said about the historical past of players, like behavior, just throughout their playing experience, 90% of them come as a multiplayer game. So whether it's a premium game or or a freemium game, whether it comes from Blizzard or even just a pirated Left 4 Dead experience, it's always multiplayer friendly. So I think those things are really important for Chinese players. I'm not saying that they don't fancy any single player experience like Witcher 3 or Elder Scrolls. They of course love it. I'm just trying to see that that's something like an extra credit.
Right. What are maybe, we're talking about things that can go really well in China. Maybe you have some stories about things that don't go well in China, some things that we should avoid doing if we want to become popular in the market?
Sure. So that's I was just about to cover my second point. It's about cultural relevancy in China. I think there are two aspects. One is I would say the cultural gap, as you see between Easterners and Westerners. And I think Eastern Europe is sort of in the like how do you say that, like
geographically?
Geographically, I'm sorry, English is poor. Geographically, you see like Eastern Europe is sitting in the middle of the two parts. So I guess you people really have a good understanding about that. But just for China market, I think that one thing is cultural relevancy. Another is, of course, censorship. So just for censorship, I cannot say too much because it's sensitive, but what I can say is that a lot of games got banned in China because of this. I'll just give you guys for some example, like there's a game, we're not allowed to speak out the name, but we call it like 3 Men with 1 Dog. Guess what it is? And there's another game called Boyfriend. Guess what it is? So the first one is our reference for GTA 5. The second is Battlefield, because the name is banned. So Battlefield, BF. So we call it Boyfriend. But that's just that's just an example of the game being banned in China. So for like censorship, I can dig deeper as for process if you guys want. But I'm just trying to address the cultural relevancy here. I think Fortnite has been doing super successful across the world, and also we've seen it just got released in China. It's been doing fairly good, not as good as it's doing in the United States. We've been trying to think about that. It's just my personal note, because this is something very hard to sort of quantify. What I'm thinking about is that so when we sold Overwatch in China, the game exploded and like everyone is playing it. Even like my sister who never played game before, she was playing it, and we have this sort of cultural meme for that because in China, if you describe, like, of course it's in Chinese, but if you describe somebody like take drugs, you just say take drugs in a Chinese version. We created that meme for like Overwatch, so we say whenever you want to play it, you say, hey, let's just take some bot, because all of the characters have very sexy bot in Overwatch. Again, it's nothing about like sexism, but it's just a funny expression that people want to use. Like you even see Soldier 76 and McCree, they have very sexy, figure. So, and then the government found out that you say something illegal because it's something related to drugs. So they actually banned the word on the internet. So whenever you're gonna play Overwatch, if you say let's just get some bot, then it's gonna be, your word is gonna be completely banned on the internet, and that's how crazy it went.
So wait, is your something government level is going to drop, like your social status, or?
No, it's just the government's aware of that you are referring too much about the word relating to drugs. Sorry for being sidetracked. I'm just trying to give an example about the cultural relevancy, because both Fortnite and Overwatch, they are in cartoon, right? Like they are cartoon style. But I think Overwatch, just aside from its backstory, all those character building, like cutscene, I think what really draws the attention from Chinese players is that you really see there is a very common aesthetic sense of beauty for Chinese, even for Chinese players. While for Fortnite, I guess it's because of the cultural relevancy. Like you see characters dancing, which is super popular and cultural accessible in US, in Europe. Like they dancing and sing rap, right? Which doesn't make sense for most of the Chinese players. So there's a huge gap between, like, they need to understand, why am I buying this cosmetics just for some weird dance, and why am I doing this? So this might be something blocking them from understanding the game. And also like this game, like just by its means, is also a very mixed genre. Fortnite comes with, of course, very advanced like building part blended with battle royale, which is very innovative in its way. But I think it's also very hard for a Chinese player to sort of understand it, because most of the players been playing those very fast-paced games like Counter-Strike or Dota or League of Legends before, and just adding more layers of gameplay will create some accessibility issues for them. That's what I'm like guessing, but I think that's part of the reason why the game is not as successful as it should be in United States as for in China.
So if we talk about the most successful games as of recent, we've all seen, like, if we played PUBG, we have played with players from China, right? And that's like, the whole meme when you're on the plane, you should really mute your microphone. It's really funny, but it gets annoying. Can you talk about like the staggering growth of PUBG in China, maybe? Because that was, if you follow Steam Spy, that was like one of those stories where Steam is like growing like rapidly, but then you go like, oh my God, holy hell, there's a lot of players just coming to play from China. I guess that somehow also connects with the internet culture, with the cafe culture in a way. That's what I heard. Can you maybe talk a little bit?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. First of all, of course, it's a universally successful game, not just about in China, but across the world. I think more importantly, it really captures the trend, because there's something happened last year in our Spring Festival, which was in February last year. So H1Z1 came out to be a hit, and the reason is because the Chinese players, they were forming up a group in the game, and sort of called themselves like Red Hood Army. It's just for fun, it's just a bunch of kids messed up with things, but basically they have very, very strong identity themselves. So if they run into people that is not Chinese, they will just attack them. They run into people wearing the red hood, they will be like, hey, sing a Chinese national song for me. If they cannot sing that, they will be regarded as the espionage. They will shoot them. So all those kind of stuff really been viral in China, because the streamers in the West, if you see YouTube and other stuff, they're just trying to mess up with them as well. So those Western streamers are sort of learning the dirty words in China, that they're trying to just sort of cursing each other. So I know it's not good, but because that was funny enough. So that raised a huge like social discussion in China. Some people regarded that as immoral, because you cannot just shoot at people, but while other people think it's fun. So battle royale at that time point came into people's eyeball, and that was right before PUBG took off, because PUBG comes in with a more mature gameplay, and like it's just everything better. And also, we have a theory about the longevity of a game. There has been a 3-year or 4 years duration of multiplayer like game. There was only League of Legends. People has been playing Legend for years, and it came to a time point that people just trying to find something new and fresh. And yeah, I think that's part of the reason why it took off in China, especially.
Right. Okay. Before we move on to the next topics, guys, if you have any questions, just start walking up to the microphone, and we'll take the questions as we talk. Если есть какие-то вопросы, просто подходите к микрофончику, и мы примем ваши вопросы по ходу дела. So, all right, we covered, like some basics. I just remember when we were doing speedrunners, like, there were, we had a character called Cosmonaut Comrade, which had like, a Soviet star on the face, and we had to like make it into a little heart. That was really great. But then I know you can't openly talk about like some subjects about legislations, but maybe you can give us a hint of what's coming, because we've all seen the news that happened, earlier this year that the government is not approving games. Like, what can we expect on that front?
I think, yes, I will talk what I can talk about. I think we've seen a lot of rumors and guessing around that because the government has kind of shut down the whole approval or certification for games, not only like just overseas but also in China. I think it's not because of there's gonna be a huge shift of the industry or anything. So just we are in China and we are pretty close into this industry as well. So what we've seen is that there are two authorities sort of heading up the game censorship and certification. One is called Ministry of Culture. The Ministry of Culture is now like sort of in its regularization, and they're gonna become the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And that's the reason why since this August they stopped review games, because themselves is in reorganization. So first step is that they have to go through the reorganization plan for the provincial level, and then it takes them to the state level for reorganization. And while GAPP, it's authorization for press, publication, television, those kind of stuff. They are still reviewing games. Playing the games, give us suggestions, but they also stopped giving out certification. And also it's because they are now reporting to another function of the government. So that's the reason why. Just an hour ago, we heard the news that they just approved the provincial level reforming plan. So I think I think it'll come to an end. I don't know what time it'll be, but I think it's moving and it's progressing. So yeah, right now I think it's pretty painful because you can never get you can just not having this certification out for a game and to having game to be able to monetize in the market. So everybody is sort of suffering in the market, but I think it'll come to an end soon.
Right. Okay. So. Do you want to talk about like slightly different subjects, because it feels like it's a different world, right?
Yeah.
And as we were just talking right before this discussion, I just go like, oh, I should tell our meeting app guys that their app is not available in China. So you have meeting requests coming in, but you can't use the app because your phone is tied to the Chinese app store. What kind of like other alternatives that people use in China? You have, because I know you have like your own local version of Twitch, your own local version of YouTube, etc. So as a publisher of games, for me and maybe for some developers here, it would be super interesting to understand like, if I want to make an impact there, like, I won't go to YouTube influencers, right? I need to go to like a different platform. How could I find people, or, maybe you have some recommendations there?
So I think it's China as a country is like, just for game industry, I think it's very hard for a developer or Western publisher to enter into. That's because every game, to be able to operate in China, it has to be represented by a local publisher, which is a domestic company in China, except for unless you sort of publish your game in offshore stores like Steam or App Store. So those are exceptions, but that's why the country is sort of very difficult to enter into. And in China also, because of the culture itself, we have very separate like social media, live streaming platforms. For example, we have 5 live streaming platforms, almost as big as YouTube, sort of fighting each other. it's getting better because there are 2 out of 5 getting stronger. But yes, that's used to be very chaotic. I think to be able to lay a solid footing in China for your own game, I would suggest a couple of things. The first of all is always try to like sort of understand your game, like what kind of audiences you are looking at, what is the budget for yourself. For example, if there's gonna be a hyper casual mobile game, the best way is to capture the market, right? You might not consider to take a lot of time spending negotiating with publishers. You might just list it on Steam instead. For some other kind of stuff, if it's like super sticky, like heavy multiplayer game, you want to adapt it to China version, you might just want to find a publisher. And I think the benefit of publisher, like for example, for NetEase, we've been helping a lot of developers, not just about Blizzard, but also like we've been helping indie developers across the world. And I think the more important thing, except for publishing game, is to build up your brand, because after this year, you will see the gaming market become very, very crowded. And I think people really, like, for example, in China, the people's most favorite brand is not any AAA game companies, but CD Projekt, because CD Projekt's being very, very honest and being very responsive to Chinese players. They have a setup in Shanghai where they can just communicate with they hire the local like marketing staff there, so they can just communicate with the players. And the players are very easy, because you need to understand the mindset of Chinese players. First of all, they are just as the same about Western players, but they are actually more sensitive because they have experienced this 10-year console ban, which they almost got no game to play. And even after the console ban, the whole society still regarded game as something like toxic, like drugs, right? So you really want to sort of revert the idea of the society. And because of that, like there's something deep in your heart. You feel like, hey, gaming is something I'm passionate about. So I would respect those decent companies. Well, I just wouldn't dare. I wouldn't just respect those guys who wouldn't respect me. So there are a lot of miscommunication. Like we've seen developers in overseas having very good attention to sort of communicate with players, but for example, they sort of ban Chinese players without reason. So they regard them as sort of like discrimination. So they attack them on Steam, sort of giving them negative reviews. We've seen that the game like promise they're gonna like having update in Chinese, like support in Chinese, but they failed to the promise. So the Chinese players would regard them as sort of cheating, betraying their promise. So all those kind of things you need to handle very carefully. So the first thing is always being responsive and always to keep your promise. The second thing is to better understand the market. You need to either partner with a local company or find a good staff who understand Chinese culture or Chinese market that can communicate with Chinese players. On mobile, you can communicate with players on TapTap. On PC, you can communicate with players on Steam. Both would work, but to having this very deep connection and communication and understanding is very, very important. So I always suggest to those partners in overseas that you might just want to hire like a Chinese exchange student or something trying to help you on this.
So if I decide to just take an offshore platform like Steam or App Store and still engage in China, you're saying that it's still worth it to hire someone even if I'm not officially published in China?
I think this is used to be how it works. I think it's still working, but like there's a lot of things that is unpredictable. Like we don't know what will happen after the reorganization of the authorities. So I would suggest of course the best way to enter into the market is always to find a partner, because if you guys are very familiar with the console industry, and I think the core of the console industry that Nintendo has created 20 years ago is about de-risk. Nintendo created this sort of console infrastructure, and they created all those first-party titles just to de-risk the development risk for third-party developers. And I think in China, to partner with local companies is sort of the way to de-risk, because normally it will come with a minimum guarantee. And on top of it, it comes with a very dedicated support. For example, NetEase, when we partner with people, we offer not just about money and rev share. We offer marketing guidance. We offer censorship. Like help, and also we offer community management, all those kind of stuff. So I think it's about it boils down to like how deep you want to engage with the players in China and how deep you want your game to be like published in China.
All right, so basically hire a Chinese exchange student and get him as a community manager.
Yeah, I think that's you can try that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it works. We just a couple of weeks ago we hired a Latin American community manager, and then all of a sudden you see our Twitter feeds just explode in that region. And I mean, it just makes sense for smaller companies to just start, engaging with local communities, because that builds a lot of trust, like you said. All right. Well, I feel like we don't have that many questions, so maybe we can share, some stories that people could find useful. We have about 20 minutes still left.
Yeah, there's just one more thing happens to me that I might want to share with you guys. Because if you look at the innovation in the industry, I think it's driven by indie developers like you guys, and also driven by those heavy budget put into AAA projects. I know it could be very painful to develop that, and most of the AAA titles are having some sort of cliche, but I think that's really the driving force for the whole industry. So it comes with these two parts. I've seen things a bit different in China. I've seen that, of course, China is having more and more developers, indie developers like you guys. For example, we've seen the success of a Scroll of Taiwu, which is a roguelike narrative game that has sold more than 1 million copy alone in China, and the developer itself comes from an uncharted city in the western, like southwestern part of China. We've seen a lot of developers mushrooming, but on top of it, I think the main game companies like Tencent and NetEase in China, I think they are driving the industry in a different way, because innovation is very important, and you've seen the market getting saturated even on mobile in China. I think the way to tackle it is like you're gonna think about how are you gonna still grow the market and provide the best experience to players. The first thing is, of course, to sort of iterate your game to provide more games every year. But I think more importantly, we've seen the trend to sort of blend the interesting mechanics from PC. For example, we actually launched a PC title this year. It's a MMORPG, of course, but it's pretty successful because we've actually added we've learned a lot from Witcher 3. So like how you do this branching storytelling, how you write the scripts and let the player to sort of to choose and have unexpected consequences, and like how you add those emergent play in the game. So I think China industry is very focused on free-to-play, but the mindset is that they are trying to learning from like indie games on Steam, and they are trying to learning from those AAA games and sort of blend those mechanics into the mobile and MMORPG PC market. So I think I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I do see the trend here, and I think that's something they are driving, and I think that's kind of another innovation, because it could comes from bottom up, but also it can comes from like across different platforms, like from PC to mobile. So that's something I want to share with you guys as well.
Right, and we were talking this morning about your guys' mobile portfolio. You mentioned that right now in the App Store top 10, you have top 7 games. Could you talk about like what kind of games those are and maybe why?
What games are those?
What kind of games you guys have published that are in the top 10, and why are they in the top 10?
Yeah, so if you look at the top 10 games, like just in terms of grossing in China, we have a lot. We have quite a lot. But the recent games have been like quite innovative on its own way. For example, we have a stamina-based action game, which was like so there was a time that people gave negative reviews to the game on one of the main like gamer community because that game was like so difficult to play with. The game is like stamina-based, so it's kind of like a blend of Dark Souls. Of course, it's not that deep because to make a game like Dark Souls, it requires a lot of knowledge, action genre. We have this take on Dark Souls, but also we blend it with those action game like you learn from like the Koei's Warrior, like Three Kingdoms Warrior, that kind of style experience that also just make you feel easier to play the game.
That's all on a touch screen, right?
Yes, and that's all on the touch screen. And of course, we are very good at because I think we're all very good at art and production. So if you're really just trying to learn and iterate the gameplay and trying to revive those kind of very mature gameplay used to be on PC to put it on mobile, I think that's a very interesting experiment. And we do see there are a lot of players fascinated by it and playing it. Yeah, there are a couple more. We just launched a survival sandbox blended with multiplayer parts. So I would dare to say it's quite much like Fallout 76. I know the game is like super negative on Metacritics, but that game is also kind of interesting because you see like how you collect resources and build stuff together with your friend in Wasteland, and that kind of experience we've never seen in China market before, and I think that's really something draws the attention of players. And also we are very fast on iteration because we launch. Basically, we do hotfix every day, and we do like weekly update, monthly content drop because we have a lot of developers working on it. So yeah, I think to be able to provide very refreshing experience and to maintain high production value is very important.
Well, from what you're saying, I see still like a very similar pattern where survival games on PC and consoles have exploded maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It started with DayZ, then H1Z1, Rust, Ark, and mobile. You're saying that a very similar game is now exploding on mobile.
Yeah.
Well, I think Fallout 76 is a great example of when AAA actually fails to catch a trend, and it takes them years to catch up. And then then the big guys are scrambling for a battle royale mode, and some succeed, some fail. So what you're telling me is that it does make sense to look at what's popular now, like or coming up in an early access form or like a mod somewhere, and then think about how to make it like even if it's not overpolished, it can still take off in a developing market such as China.
I think you gotta admit that first of all, I don't think there comes like a native like original thing for device. It doesn't like I think players might be very passionate about console and PC, but it doesn't mean that like mobile is born with its own like crime or evilness. I do think devices is kind of neutral, and mobile is sort of lagging behind because it's born late, right? But I do see with right approach, and of course there's gonna be 5G, there's gonna be cloud-based streaming, those kind of stuff. But I do see there's gonna be a picture that in 5 or 10 years, every single device is gonna compete in the same area, and mobile games is gonna compete with AAA games and indie games from Steam because you're gonna play games that is powered by cloud-based solution. So I think it's a time to sort of get rid of those stereotype. Really think about like how you can provide innovative experience not just on mobile but also across all platforms.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned 5G and cloud-based because what we're noticing now, like especially in densely populated areas, is that Wi-Fi is becoming really crappy. Like whenever you're on a call, it's usually better to put 4G on. So odds are that the next generation of cellular is going to be much more advanced than home networks are today. Especially in the U.S., like the infrastructure in the suburbs is not very good, so getting fiber internet is still a hassle in the biggest economy of the world. So what do you think we should watch out for? We have the engine side, right? The game engine side, like Unreal Engine, Unity, CryEngine. We have all of the capabilities of Amazon, right? Where you can just like deploy and scale like crazy. And we also have this watch can probably land on the moon. The technology is really amazing. So with all of it coming together, what do you think are like some of the big opportunities that we have coming up, just with all of this technology being available to us?
This is too big of a question. I actually don't know what kind of technology or platform could dominate. We've seen some pretty advanced technologies that are being showcased to us in the recent few months, and I'm personally very passionate about it. As I said, I think I could imagine a scene that in 5 years or 10 years, every single game is going to compete in the same area. But even so, there's going to be different appetite and focus and taste. I really think as for game developers, to be dedicated and passionate about its own idea is very important, because you just never know what kind of stuff would take off. And I think the key is to read the room in a country. If you are focusing on China, you need to understand what is a hook in China, and it's actually very easy to do that. Basically, you just run analysis, pull out the 10 most bestseller, and just dig deeper, because all those top 10 bestsellers, they all come with tons of different articles, passages, reading, analyzing it. So it's actually very easy to understand the hook. But on top of it, I think what really shines is your own creative idea and how your understanding about the genre. So yeah, I think with 5G, with cloud-based solutions, things might get easier and it might get more competitive. But I think that is to be able to create something by your own as well is always the key.
All right. Well. I think this was a good intro into the market. So if you're going to be around, you can catch Evan here in the hall, ask some questions. But otherwise, I think this was quite insightful.
Yeah, I'll be here around today. If you guys have any questions, or if you guys just want to talk, I'm also available.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Evan.